Hello and welcome to today's online intelligence briefing on the 2019 annual report from Jane's Defence Budgets, providing a review of global and regional defence spending trends. My name is Fenella McGurty. I am the Jane's Principal Analyst for Europe and Middle East, and joining me today will be Guy Eastman, Senior Analyst for North America, Anna Roxana Popescu, Senior Analyst for Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, and Andrew MacDonald, Principal Analyst for Russia and Asia Pacific. I'd like to highlight that the information used to compile today's presentation has been drawn from a variety of Jane's content, but particularly Jane's Defence Budgets, which is part of the Jane's Industry and Markets Intelligence Centre. So on with the presentation, what happened in 2019? This map provides a summary of key indicators for each region and their performance in 2019. There is a heat map showing the scale of 2019 growth of each country, as covered in Jane's Defence Budgets. So while growth slowed in most regions this year, Europe experienced exceptional growth of over 5%, which is really remarkable. The region outperformed most of the emerging markets. And while we do expect this trend to moderate, the outlook is still fairly positive. While North America trend does look subdued, it's really because spending is falling back to trend levels after a 2018 surge in spending, as we will see on the next slide. In Latin America, we've seen growth steadily recover, but pervasive political and economic risks threaten the outlook of some countries. We've excluded Venezuela from Latin America trends as to avoid any distortion. Growth in the rest of the region appears stable, if somewhat subdued. Russia and the CIS spending really struggled in 2019, and the outlook is quite subdued as well. And without any meaningful recovery in the oil price or improvement in wider economic conditions, regional spending here will really struggle to return to 2015 peak levels. Asia Pacific growth slowed over the last few years, and 2019 continued this slowdown. However, over the longer term, spending should gather momentum with a CAGR of 4.1% to 2029, as China and Indian growth picks up again. So a quick summary of the key trends this year. So 2019 was the 6th consecutive year of defence spending increases, but growth has markedly slowed as American spending fell back from the 2018 spike. Europe helped to bolster the trend, not just Eastern Europe. Western Europe played a key role in supporting global growth. Russia and Middle East spending will continue to be constrained by the oil price, and Asia Pacific's growth fell to its lowest levels since 2010. But there is evidence that growth will strengthen over the next years, driven by Chinese spending. I'll now hand over to Guy Eastman for our North America coverage.
Thank you, Fenella. So we will continue with the largest region in dollar value. That would be North America. It only has two countries, the U.S. and Canada, and we'll talk to those. So the first graph is a standard graph that you're going to see throughout the presentation. This is the North America region defense expenditure. It is a 20-year view, okay? If you look at the bottom scale, it's from 2010 to 2030. That's your standard view. The left side will generally be USD billions, constant dollars, constant 2019 dollars. On the right side, the scale is in percent, and that would be growth of the region over time. So those are the scales. Now, on the bottom, you have the stacked bar is green for United States and gray for Canada, and the gray line is the region growth. So that's the standard lookup. There's going to be a standard time now line, a dashed vertical line to show where we are in the time 2019. You can see in the gray line there's a spike in fiscal year 18 for the North American region that was driven by the United States. The region going out in time, out to 2030, has a minus 0.4% 5-year CAGR percent based on fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 24. In fiscal year 19, the region is at $743.1 billion, which constitutes 41.2% of the global defense budget. The initial decline that you see from fiscal year 10 was due to the U.S. overseas contingency operation budgets declining, but those have stabilized since fiscal year 17. Canada generally is increasing through fiscal year 24, trying to get to the $21 billion mark by fiscal year 25. So therefore, the North America region remains the largest and does show some negative growth going forward. Next slide. So this chart is the global top 10 country defense budgets as of 2019. Jane's defense budget analyzes 105 countries, and this is a look at the top 10. So you can see that number 1, U.S., and number 2, China, maintained their position from 2018 as outliers. In 2019, the U.S. defense budget is larger than the sum of the next 12 countries, which are depicted there from China all the way over to South Korea, plus Australia, Brazil, and Italy, which are not on the chart. Canada is not shown on the chart, but it maintained its number 15 position.
Thank you very much, Guy. Now, looking at the overall defense spending in Latin America, ignoring Venezuela, whose hyperinflation distorts past and future trends, 2019 marked a record year for the decade at almost $54 billion and with a growth of 3.44%. However, growth is forecast to be more anemic in the coming decade, as it is not expected to go much beyond 2.5%. This is largely due to the state of the economy, as this year and the next, Latin America is said to be the world's slowest growing region. In Brazil and Mexico, the region's biggest economies, weak budgetary positions represent roadblocks for governments, while central banks are wary of cutting interest rates too far and weakening their currencies. Argentina, the region's third largest economy, has entered into yet another economic and financial market crisis, making monetary or fiscal loosening extremely difficult. Following the results of the August 2019 primary elections won by Macri's Peronist opponent, Alberto Fernandez, the peso fell 23% in one day. Fernandez also went on to win the October 2019 presidential election, marking the country's return to Peronism just as the threat of a new debt default looms. The situation is not helped by the fact that the global economy is slowing down, just as tensions with the US may prove difficult to manage. Earlier this week, US President Donald Trump announced plans to reimpose tariffs on imports of steel and aluminum from Brazil and Argentina after accusing the countries of devaluating their currencies. The region has also undergone a series of political crises. Venezuela's implosion under the socialist government of Nicolás Maduro is the most dramatic feature. More than 4.5 million refugees have fled the once wealthy exporting nation after an economic collapse which has few peacetime parallels. More recently, protests began in Ecuador and Peru in October against, respectively, the removal of a fuel subsidy and the dissolution of Congress for political gain. The fuel subsidy removal in Ecuador was required by the IMF's fiscal austerity measures and would have helped the government achieve its goal of shifting a fiscal deficit in 2018 to surplus by 2020. Meanwhile,
thank you, Anna. So, as I've said, 2019 was really a remarkable year in Europe. We saw few countries implementing either double-digit growth or growth not seen since before the crisis. Sweden's 2019 budget was repeatedly revised upwards over the course of 2019, resulting in an overall increase of nearly 9%. Germany had a record year with an 11% surge to almost $50 billion. The UK did manage 1.7% growth, but the budget is likely to face considerable headwinds until some economic and political certainty is restored. France's stronger growth began with the 2018 budget, and the military financing law remains on track. Increases will be directed towards equipment maintenance and the modernisation of nuclear weapons. Spain and Greece implemented respectable growth this year after fairly lacklustre performance since 2010. And looking further east, we've seen strong and steady annual growth in Poland, which continues to bolster spending as a proportion of GDP. Romania is an example of a big growth market in the sub-region. The country implemented 20% increases in 2016 and 17 and further 10% increases over the last 2 years.
Thanks very much, Vanilla. For the rest of the presentation, I'll take you through Russia and the CIS and Asia Pacific before offering a few short concluding points. In the Russia and CIS region, 2019 saw a continuation of the previous year's trends, with growth of 1.2%, taking total spending to almost $53 billion. These movements are, of course, driven mainly by the Russian budget, which you can see makes up around 90% of the region's total. Outside of Russia, the second largest budget is Kazakhstan, whose spending grew by almost a quarter this year to nearly $1.9 billion. The only other country in the CIS which spends more than $1 billion annually on defence is Azerbaijan, which allocated $1.8 billion to defence in 2019, a cut of 1.9% and the second consecutive year of falling budgets. Between 2012 and 2015, increases in Russian defence expenditure averaged 12% a year in real terms, with spending increasing from 40 billion to 57 billion US dollars and from 2.5% of GDP to 3.8%. In 2016 and 2017, this expansion was disrupted as falling oil prices and the imposition of sanctions following Russia's annexation of Crimea forced successive defence budget cuts of 6.1% and 11.9% in real terms. Growth turned positive again in 2018, but remained relatively weak at just 0.75%. This year, Russia's defence budget, originally set to be 2.9 trillion rubles at the start of the year, was subsequently increased to 3.1 trillion, or around 47 billion US dollars. However, this was an even smaller expansion than we saw in 2018, and the budget remains around 16% lower in real terms than its peak in 2015. Russia's economy remains heavily dependent upon the energy sector, and as such its health has tended to fluctuate in line with hydrocarbon markets. From almost $110 a barrel in 2013, oil prices fell to a low of just $40 in 2014. Following this collapse, the Russian economy contracted by 2.4% in 2015 and 0.2% in 2016. This prompted an immediate slowdown in the growth of state spending, but not an immediate cut. And so this had the effect of worsening the country's fiscal balance and greatly increasing debt levels. Although defence spending growth remained extremely high in 2014 as Russia began its military intervention in Ukraine, by 2017 the equivalent of 10 billion US dollars has been cut from its annual budget. So what effect has this had on procurement programmes? In 2018, a new, much delayed state armament programme was approved, and it's now scheduled to run until 2027. Under this programme, Russia plans to spend $290 billion on the development, procurement and modernisation of equipment. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.